Well, thanks so much to Jim and Nancy for, being willing to fly across the U.S. to spend time with us in November at the CHRO Exchange in Scottsdale. We're always excited to bring experts together to talk about what they love. Really, there's nothing more exciting and there's nothing more engaging than hearing people talk about their passion and the things that they are good at and they have experience in, and understand both the things that drive them from a personal and purpose perspective and the way that purpose gets to manifest inside of organizations. So thanks to you both for jumping in here to talk just a little bit about the content we'll be talking about together in November. Jim and Nancy, maybe we could start by having you guys just talk a little bit about Rogers as an organization and maybe introduce yourselves as well so listeners have some idea about who's on the call.
Well, thanks, Hal. I'm great to be here on the call with you today and to talk about, a subject, as you mentioned, that we have just such tremendous passion for. My background is, first part of my career as a military pilot. Then I went into operations, ran a business, and moved into HR later in my career. And I'm sitting here today working for Rogers Communications, which is one of the three big telecommunications companies in Canada. Our purpose as a company is to connect Canadians through wireless and residential products and services and through a national media business. We have a team of 26,000 people, a market cap of over $30 billion. We're just about to step into our 60th year in business. We own the Toronto Maple Leafs, or 37.5% of the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Toronto Raptors, who were big champions last year, so we're proud of that.
Oh, I haven't heard about that. Oh, okay.
Yeah, you haven't heard about that. And the Toronto Blue Jays. And I would just, before I introduce Nancy, I would let Nancy introduce herself. I would just say that I just love what I do. I think I've got one of the best jobs in North America. Every day that I come in, I just try to make Rogers a higher performing company, a better place to work, and to better serve our customers. So I feel like I'm in my wheelhouse, and I just feel like I'm in a very privileged position to be here.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for that, and I hope and sort of think that we're going to hear about how what you learned and what you experienced as a military pilot will kind of find its way through your everyday experience now, if not only metaphorically. I'd love to hear about that as we go on.
Beautiful.
And Nancy, how about you?
Well, thank you so much. I'm delighted to join you as well. And for me, I lead our organization development team here at Rogers, and we drive our people and culture agenda. So it is a real great opportunity to be in an organization that has not only a need for this, but there's a real passion that we are creating in terms of people. And we have some great stories that we want to share with you. My background is in organization development and social networks, so it's great to work in a field that I can put my learnings into practice, and I have a great team of people that support Rogers in terms of making our people and teams more effective every single day. So it is really a great opportunity to be on this journey with Jim and the broader Rogers organization.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Nancy, and thanks again for making the time. And just in service to our listeners, so you all know exactly who is on this call, Jim, Nancy, and I am Hal Adler. I started my company, Leadership Landing, now 11 years ago. We focus on organizational development, coaching, and consulting, and specifically around helping senior leaders, senior executives develop self-awareness through a number of mechanisms and vehicles, the primary of which is executive coaching. So that's how I spend my time, and that's how we spend our time. Our company is headquartered in the San Francisco Bay Area, and yes, the Raptors win did have an impact on our experience here as Warrior fans, and congratulations to you and to your team. So,
thank you.
So thanks for the background, and thanks for sharing a little bit about your stories. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about this idea of transformation. In the synopsis of the presentation, your presentation, the Empowered CHRO that you'll be sharing in Toronto in October, you talk about the importance of HR being seen differently from perhaps the traditional role of compliance and tactical leaders to more strategic leaders, more strategic forecasters is the word in your description. And one of the things I particularly gravitated to in your description and synopsis of that presentation was your sort of owning in the way you talk about it, the importance of first transforming yourselves, right? And you talk about verbatim, such an approach can only work if HR leaders are willing to transform themselves from compliance to strategic forecasters. And I think that's very important because I think, the vast majority of HR leaders that are running organizations and running departments, of course, want to be seen as true business partners and true strategic leaders inside the business. But that part of what it takes that involves transforming oneself to actually make that leap before they are asking anyone to see them that way is, I think, often missed. So with that in mind, I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about, how did you know that you were successful in your own transformation as you were working to interface with the leaders across Rogers?
Hal, I think for me, if I think back on the last 20 years of really working with CEOs and top executive teams about, how to win in the marketplace, how to really win in the marketplace. I think the things for me, the principles that I've tried to embrace and I've tried to develop into the HR organizations that I've led are pretty simple principles. The first one is, you have to look through the lens of the CEO and look through the lens of the business. And that our role in HR is ultimately to help the business perform better. And so everything that we do, everything that HR organizations should do is to help drive performance, improve performance in the organization. And to do this, you need a seat at the table. So that's the first thing. The second thing for me is, you have to become expert in, building trust and credibility with the CEO and with the top executive team and top leaders in the organization. Our credibility in terms of driving impact in the company is grounded in trust. And it just has to be that way. And you have to want to have a high level of trust, you have to be there when they need you and never let people down. And the last thing I would say that for us, when we think about building high performance, we really start with culture. And culture building starts with people, getting the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus, right people into the right seats, and building high performance teams. So the talent agenda and being disciplined around talent is a critical element of driving successful change and successful transformation in businesses. So I think those are the three principles, if I think about the personal transformation side, not the business transformation side, that I think are kind of essential ingredients to driving impact.
Okay, great. So thank you, Jim. That's really helpful. I wonder if you could just dive a little bit more into this idea of being disciplined around talent and what that means to you.
Sure. Let's have Nancy lead on that.
Sure.
Thanks. So in terms of the discipline of having a talent process, again, for us, it starts with focusing on our people and understanding our people and having a true, a consistent process that our leaders own. And where we've been into transformation is historically we were a buy culture. And the obstacle we had is how do you create a build culture when, and it's truly a mindset shift, and what do we do to enable our leaders to do that, to be accountable? So we have put in a very consistent way of how we engage our leaders in thinking about their people. And again, it is people and the culture we need to be successful. And so we have an annual process, and it starts from the top of the house. It's owned by our CEO and led by Jim as well. And these are conversations that happen to truly talk about, again, the business, and then the people that we require and the capabilities in terms of right people, right seat to ensure that we're set up for success in the future. So very similar to other talent processes, but I think what we do, there's a discipline in terms of identifying the right people, right seat, and working back to ensure we make this happen. And again, year over year, where we're seeing the traction is going deeper in the organization to identify, again, the talent, the capabilities we require, and having that, not only the identification, but the growth mindset. How do you close the gap? So the conversations are now more about the people and how we continue to develop them and foster that build culture.
Yeah. So interesting. And when I introduced this podcast, I misspoke just a bit, or I misspoke by omission just a bit. Not only will Rogers be presenting at CHRO in Scottsdale in November, but Rogers, in particular Jim, will be presenting at CHRO in Toronto in October. So I apologize for that omission. And as you were talking, Nancy, it reminded me that your presentation in Scottsdale in November will be focused on something that you hit on just now, which is this piece of accountability. And it is the holy grail of organizational culture, and it's something that every organization struggles with, what it means, what it doesn't mean. I wonder if, without giving away the whole sort of secret sauce, I wonder if you could speak just a little bit more to what you'll be talking about. I'm sure you already have just now, but this idea of that conversation. You mentioned when behavior is not sort of aligned to the values of the organization, there is a conversation that happens. That can't be the be-all, end-all of of how Rogers works through accountability in the organization. Could you help us a little bit understand just a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So for us, in terms of identifying leadership accountability, at the heart of it, it's about values. It's understanding what are the values we aspire to, and ensuring that you anchor those with your own leaders in terms of what does that look like day to day, and ensuring that we have alignment in terms of that aspiration of what I would say behaviorally anchoring our values. And what we've done at Rogers, which is multifaceted on this journey of driving accountability in our leaders, is talking about values and culture and their ownership of what the culture we need to be successful and what their role is in terms of enabling that. And we've brought our leaders together, and we have a great program that I'll be talking about more in terms of differentiating us in the how piece. But in addition to that, what we've done is we have other types of assessments very similar to our 360 that aligns to our values, and we have ways of assessing how are we doing against this as leaders, how are we seeing one another, how do others, our own leaders, see us, and what we've also done another level deeper is we are measuring accountability of not just the what we do to drive performance and results every day, but how we do it in terms of the people metrics. And I think what's unique for us is we have a list of metrics such as our employee engagement, our inclusion, coaching, and other types of internal talent mobility of mobilizing the growth and development of our people are things that are important metrics that we share with our leaders. And we've told them very transparently to say these are the metrics that drive the how, and this is so important for you in terms of your accountability. You own this, and we are going to let you know how you're doing, and we will support you to facilitate back to the conversations to ensure you're going to be successful in these areas.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, that you in fact answered a couple of questions. One specifically, how you view accountability and how you drive it through the organization. But I also think it reinforces this point about discipline, because what you've just very clearly articulated in a minute or less is sort of a full court press. In other words, what I'm hearing is that anything that you can be doing to help folks align their behavior with the organization's intention through values, you are doing. And whether that's informal conversations and coaching and real-time real-time reinforcement, or it's the formal, the assessment and the benchmarking and the 360s, that you are working through both with the kind of discipline that it takes. And it is what it takes. And, certainly not coincidentally, Rogers is named a 100 best company, 100 best Canadian workplace, right? So clearly what you're doing is having the outcome that you would hope based on all of that activity. So thank you for all that. That makes very good sense. If we could go back to this idea, if you don't mind, about transformation and personal and organizational transformation. This picture that we paint of plotting a course for our own transformation, so we ourselves get out of the tactical mindset, and move into the idea of growth mindset or more strategic partnership and strategic forecasting or leadership. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about obstacles, because these journeys do not come without trial and tribulation. So maybe if you could both name an obstacle or two that you experienced along the way that first gave you pause or doubt about the journey itself, and then how you persevered.
I think the biggest one for me, Hal, was Rogers we were founded by Ted Rogers. He passed away probably about 10 years ago. And in founder-driven companies, the founder, not only has a massive impact when they're here, but they continue to have a big impact when they're not here. And so one of the biggest obstacles I think that Rogers faced was after Ted passed away, the leadership void that created. And I joined in the company in 2011, which was about a year or so after he passed away. And as the company tried to settle, we then ended up having 3 CEOs in a period of 5 or 6 years. And so for me, as the head of HR, even at the best of times, CEO transitions can be disruptive. And but going through more than one in a fairly short period of time, I think we've landed in a great place today. We have a fantastic executive, Joe Natale at the helm. But the path to get there, just drove phenomenal change. We mentioned sometimes, and Nancy will probably talk about this when she presents in November. I'll do the same thing in October. From January of 2014 to the end of 2018, we had 150 executive changes out of 170 in our top executive group. So Now, some of that was driven by the CEO change. Some of it was driven by the fact that, we needed a different kind of leader, right, to build a different kind of culture to drive the kind of results that we needed in the marketplace. But that whole you used the term obstacle. Like for me, that was an issue I was dealing with every single day, right? In terms of the uncertainty that this change creates. How do you stabilize? How do you bring the right people in? How do you keep the sense of pride and excitement about the future alive? In terms of the culture building that we're doing, in terms of the engagement that we're driving. It's just a massive challenge.
Okay. So, yes, clear. And, when, without knowing the exact timeline and understanding how many employees and how big the organization is now, fair to say that that when you came on in 2011, it was already a larger organization, of 27,000 employees. Do you remember what the employee count was then?
Yeah, I would say when I joined, it was about 30,000, right? So we've
30,000. Oh, okay.
Yeah, we've tightened up the operation over the last few years.
Okay.
So because the marketplace, of course, just continues to get more and more competitive.
Yeah.
And so we've kind of tightened up our operation. We've changed the leadership team. But the big test for me, Hal, in terms of how do we know that what we've been doing, like the talent discipline, the building the culture, the drive for higher engagement, I believe that culture is the performance engine of the company. Like it's really the engine that drives performance. And we know it's working at Rogers because the last 3 years we've outperformed. Like we hit a dip in 2013-14 and we're climbing back up. And 2018 was the best year of performance that we've had in over a decade. and we outperformed our competitors. So these changes in people, this rebuilding of leadership, this engagement of our workforce, is you can feel the momentum building in the company, the energy building in the company, and we outperformed in 2018, the best performance we've had in over a decade.
Wonderful. If I were to ask you to go back or think back 7-8 years, your first year or two inside the business with this kind of change and turnover going around you, what would you say might be the single most important thing that you noticed or participated in or did to stabilize and ground things at that time of uncertainty?
I think when I arrived, it was a couple of years after Ted Rogers had passed away. And you would see this in founder companies. You typically, with a founder that is a bigger than life personality, the values and the purpose of the company is more implicit. Yeah. And as long as they're there and they're present, you don't need to define it. And one of the things that Joe Natale and I talked about when he came on board was we needed that there's an architecture for change, for successful change. And that architecture begins with not asking yourself what to change, but rather, asking yourself what not to change. What's the reason for the company's existence in terms of its purpose? What are the values and beliefs that this company stands for? So one of the things that really helped us was we defined with the family, after the passing of our founder, the purpose and the values and the behaviors flowing from those values that we expected our leaders to live every day. And that clarifying that context, for how people would show up and work together was one of the most important things I think that we did as an organization. And holding people to account, hiring people against that in terms of fit, holding people to live those values on a day-to-day basis and show up in the way that we need leaders to show up to be able to win in the marketplace was probably one of the most powerful, things that we did in the organization. And we clarified it through a crowdsourcing initiative with our 26,000 people. So it was a very, very powerful time for us.
Wonderful. You can almost feel the anchoring quality that work had in the way that you tell the story. And I think that the one important takeaway from that is, when we think, this idea of the implied values, the implied culture being very much in place when a founder is in the daily operation and the family, the culture of the family is the culture of the organization. Right, that makes sense. And then, in your story, in the Rogers story, as the organization sort of transcended that particular framework, you're recognizing we need to take what's implied and make it explicit. We need to take what's in the air and put it on the walls. And, of course, not just on the walls, but actually, in the everyday, and we need to concretize, articulate what is it that has made this so special when it was Ted, is that right?
Yes.
Right. What is it that made it so special when Ted was in the operation? And let's make that, let's articulate that for real. And I think one of the important takeaways is for organizations that will say, we don't need to formalize our values. We just know them. They're implied. They're in the air. Why would we need to put a frame around them? And I think your example is a very, very good one. The risk is, of course, just putting a frame around them and slapping them on the wall. Right, but going through the rigor of articulating them and then to apply that discipline again. There's that word again, that idea again, the discipline to say it's not enough just to say who we are. We have to have it flow through our blood, flow through our veins, and the way we do that is taking these steps. Right. So very, very cool. Thank you. What about you, Nancy? What about this idea of personal transformation? And what obstacles you've encountered through your time there?
Yeah, for me, some of the obstacles very similar to Jim. I think when there is a lot of change happening, and again, the number of executives that turned over multiple CEOs, it's getting that searching for stability because you believe in your cause and you truly believe that driving our people and culture agenda, we were somewhat behind in this, but once we got the traction, it was just how do you continue to differentiate yourself in this area? But again, you had to be able to recreate the story and engage new leaders as they were coming on board. So for me personally, you hear the statement that people are truly our differentiator, and it's like, how do we create that in an organization that is going through constant change, and ensuring that we have our North Star and we keep rooted in what we believe. And I think that's one thing that I would say was we never lost sight of what was important for us, and we had put some key markers in the sand when we defined our strategy, and we kept to that plan, and we continued in our investment in these areas. And I think that was, was hard at some times, but at the same time, looking back, it is so important to not lose your North Star in this journey, regardless of the changes that are happening. I will call out one metric that we've had that I think has really been a core metric for us in terms of our people, and that's our employee engagement. And it touches today all 26,000 people. And it is so important for us because it's our one vehicle of asking all of our people what matters to them. And putting, not only asking, but what we shifted in our plans was we also started really focusing on actioning what's most important from a CEO perspective, and communicating very, very clearly to our people what are the key actions we're taking from what they've told us. And where, even through all the changes and transformations, we kept steady year-over-year improvement in our engagement. And today we're at 85%, which is 5% points higher than best in class. Wow. And again, this is key. And I think the big shift we made in the last 2 years was recognizing the voice of our frontline employees as well. So again, having these markers, asking, not assuming, sticking to our values have been huge learnings for us as we've transformed.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, in this idea of outperforming peers and hitting or exceeding plan, in a workforce where the actively engaged are over 60%, actively disengaged are under 60%. When you hear of an organization that is looking at 85% engaged employees, of course that's your performance engine, right? Culture is the performance engine, and people are the culture. That's what culture is, right? Society, people, your employees. So here you have 85% of your folks coming into work with an engaged mindset, and not surprisingly, not coincidentally, exceeding plan and outperforming peers. Wonderful. Thank you for that. And again, this idea of consistency, staying the course. It's more about the rigor and the discipline of saying this is what's important to us, we live in a very distractible world where it's very easy to say this is important to us on Monday, but on Tuesday this is important to us, and on Wednesday we're back to Monday's important thing, and on Thursday it's something completely different, right? It's hard. What you're talking about sounds simple. And by definition, it may be, but it's not easy, and it takes real awareness and real consistency and real discipline. And congratulations for finding a way to do that across a company as large as yours. It's obviously working. Thanks again. Well, I want to come back, if you don't mind, to this differentiation. I think it's an important one, this internal differentiation between I, the compliance manager, or the tactical HR leader, and I, the strategic forecaster, the one that really has a seat at the table. The difference between those two definitions, I suppose, or ways of characterizing how an HR leader would find themselves in an organization. And I wonder if you can share examples of how, say, an HR compliance manager, and let's not get hung up by the title. There are executive leaders that are stuck in tactical and compliant work, and then there are executive leaders that are strategic, that are high-level strategic thinkers and add at that level. Conversely, there are mid-level managers that think broadly, strategically, and with a growth mindset, and there are mid-level managers that think too tactically. So let's just talk about the characteristic of someone more tactically or compliant-oriented, and the characteristic of someone with a growth or strategic mindset, and adding at that value, and talk about tactically how would they differ, say, in the approach to leadership development and or attracting and retaining talent.
Yeah. I think the thing that stands out for me, Hal, if I go back a few years, as I stepped into Rogers, which was at the time was a company where you could feel the business momentum slowing, right? Like we'd missed a market shift, growth had slowed, the competitive dynamic had heated up, and the customer was taking on more prominence. And I think at the time when we looked at the HR organization, it was a committed team. They worked hard. But our CEO at the time had said to me, they're just not driving impact into the business. And one of the things that it turns out I think was a really good decision for us at the time was I decided to take all of our HR business partners and get the best of the best skilled up in coaching. And I know you're a professional coach, an executive coach. And what we did is we hired a company that was certified with the International Coach Federation, and we put all of our HR leaders through the first 24 hours of the 60 hours required for certification. And we took our best HR business partners right through to ICF certification and coaching. And it was so powerful because that gave them the confidence. They were a young, dynamic, hardworking team, but they just didn't have the confidence around the table to lean in, right? And when they needed to lean in with the leaders. And it was so effective that we then took 1,000 of our people leaders through the first 24 hours of the ICF coaching. And our view was we wanted to, instead of going a mile wide and an inch deep on building leaders, we wanted to go narrow and deep and give people a skill that they could not just use at work, but that they could use in their life, a life skill. And it's paid dividends for us in terms of, driving impact and getting behind people in their development. And even the kinds of conversations that are happening now are so much more transparent, and the ability to deal with conflict so much more ready.
Can I ask you a qualifying question about that?
Yeah.
Okay. We all know a lot of organizations that try something that seems to work and want to go deeper. Like this idea of saying, wow, look at the impact that had. Here's an idea. Let's take 1,000 of our leaders, and go deep with them and expose them to 24 hours of this training, right? And see what happens. Obviously unproven until you do it, until you do it at that mass. Proven at some level, but until you do it at that mass. I can think of 99 out of 100 organizations that would say, wow, great idea, but how are we going to pull 1,000 leaders off the line? How are we going to organize an effort that deep and that big? How are we going to come up with the resources, the financial resources, in order to make this happen, let alone the facilitation resources? It would be really cool, but let's think about it next quarter, which then becomes, let's think about it in fiscal 2020, which then becomes, what was that thing you were talking about again?
Yeah.
So maybe you could speak just a little bit to, back to this idea of obstacles. And going to that moment where someone in the room said, what if we pulled 1,000 of our folks, which in most organizations sounds a little ridiculous and awesome, by the way, but just crazy. Yeah. Like 1,000 people. Yeah. Why? How about let's start with 12 more, right? But yeah. So big idea, big iconic idea, big broad sweeping thing. Talk about whether or not that raised eyebrows, that begot sort of resistance, or back to your point about credibility and trust early on. Was it so in place by then that it became, well, great idea, Jim. What else you got?
Yeah. Well, the funny thing about this, Hal, is that when we started the coaching thing, to be honest, I kind of went covert on it, right? Like we kind of did it a little bit under the table at first. But here's what happened, right? Then we let the leaders speak for themselves. When we moved from HR to the line, which is always our intention, because The HR piece was more to give credibility to the function, but the real business impact was getting our leaders to lead differently. Yeah. And I can tell you that one of the things that we do is we measured all of our programs that we do with program NPS, Net Promoter Score.
Sure.
And the coaching program, and we got our leaders, when I went into almost every coaching program that we did for the first probably 20 modules that we did, and they all sent notes to our CEO and said that this was the best training they'd ever had, not just at Rogers, but in their career. And that it was, for some people who thought they knew how to coach, and then to learn how to coach effectively, it was transformational for them. Yeah. And then they started bringing it into their teams. And then, in our action planning around our survey, we started to watch the data move from, a low of 68% engagement in the company. And every year we go up 3 or 4 points, right? And the leadership effectiveness of our team, which we measured, would go up. And so we just kind of demonstrated with data. Data was the great leveler. And show me the data was the great kind of thing that we did to tell the story and reinforce the story and continue to get the reinvestment. And actually, we've not only done it once with coaching, we did it a second time. We've done it twice now. We created this leadership program, which I think is one of the best leadership experiences I've ever seen in terms of design, called The House. And that was all about, the role of leaders in shaping and building culture and high-performance teams. And that was another 95% score on program NPS. So we've kind of lit up our leaders, knowing that HR is too small to drive this kind of impact. You have to drive it through the line, right?
Yeah, super smart. And I love the idea that what I'm hearing between the lines a little bit is that you found a way to drive this and have none of the focus on you.
Right.
Which is super smart. I mean, you're basically getting the heck out of the way as soon as possible. The minute it becomes an HR thing, can be the moment where business leaders around the table say, well, why and where and who's going to pay for it? And you didn't make it an HR thing. You sort of pulled the strings from behind the scenes. The covert idea in this particular case is brilliant.
Yeah,
nice right. Yeah, okay. Nancy, what do you think about that?
You know what? It's amazing because, again, we often say the soft stuff's the really, really hard stuff. And Jim always says, coaching is a life skill, and it truly is. And what is wonderful is we are now in a place that this has become viral. So we have an online community of people that have gone through coaching and they want to work towards their certification. So they pair up with one another, and we have thousands of people that are supporting one another, coaching one another. So we're creating a community now at Rogers and removing barriers where people are, again, using this skill set. And what is so fantastic, Jim mentioned the data. The data itself in what we see is we have coaching and other behaviors in terms of supporting your people. Those who are displaying these behaviors, and most recently we saw this in our executives, we had 143 people that we went through a 360 process, and those who were coaching and supporting others in terms of growth, we had a 5% point increase in their overall engagement. So again, we know engagement links to performance. The bottom line gets impacted in relation to the house. So coaching was really a great, and the kudos goes to Jim in terms of setting that foundation for bringing it to Rogers and really differentiating, because a lot of organizations have coaching, but making it that, there's a pride that we are getting this to a level of formality with the certification is very unique here.
Beautiful.
You build the capability.
Beautiful. And the confidence, right? I mean,
and confidence.
Right.
And an awareness, too.
Yes, you're unlocking the capability and organizing the capability, but maybe as much as anything else, it really is the confidence to say, yeah, I can talk with you about this. Or the vulnerability and the trust to say, okay, can we talk about this? There's a lot behind that. It sounds like a case study in and of itself. Congratulations. It's a big deal. Well, so I want to loop back in our last question here to this recurring theme that's in the description, the idea, and we're talking about self-awareness on and off throughout this, the idea of managing our own transformations as leaders inside of organizations, our own transformations from those that are managing more tactically or from a more compliant perspective, and those that are managing or leading from a higher level, more strategic perspective. The number of performance-based conversations that sound something like we'd like you to think more strategically probably number in the millions a day across the workforce in the world. And this is this important idea of relying less on the organization to get us there or get me there, and instead thinking for oneself, transforming oneself from a tactical, compliant-based person to a more strategic, different value perspective. So I wonder if you could both share just a little bit from your own experience about, or share or offer some ideas for how your peers in the audience in Toronto and in Scottsdale might think about for themselves, how do I know if I believe I've earned the voice to be invited to the most strategic conversations, how do I know if I'm there? And of course the most important feedback is whether or not you have been invited, right? I mean, that's probably the most important piece. Have you been invited? But also on one's own journey, I want to be thought of as a strategic, high-value leader. Right now I'm in a more compliant, tactical role. What are the ways I can think about my own perspective, my own growth, the way I react or respond or add to what the conversation is? How can you help us think about whether or not I am in fact adding at that transformative, highest value strategic level? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Makes a lot of sense, Hal.
What do you think?
I think this is something that, for me, I think you put your finger on something that's so critical, and it's something for me that I work on every day, and maybe you never get there, but it's all around. We referred to it earlier. It's around how do you make one of your signature qualities as a leader, especially in HR, to be able to build high trust relationships with people quickly, and not just high trust relationships with people that you naturally get along with or you have affinity for, but it's with everyone. And I just feel that you have to become expert at this. And if you want to be the head of HR and work with a CEO or a top executive team or a board, or in this case a controlling shareholder like a family, you have to be seen as the trusted advisor. And you have to learn, and this is one of the things that I try to do with people that I'm working with, is how do you help them learn how to build trust and build trust quickly? And, it comes down to, being there when you're needed. It's not a 5-day-a-week job. It's a 24/7. The phone rings on Sunday night and your CEO's got an issue, then you need to pick up that phone and you need to be there when they need you to engage on an issue that you're trying to solve. And so for me, I would say the big differentiator in terms of strategic HR at the top CEO and top executive team level is the ability to build high trust relationships quickly and to continue to behave in a way in supporting the CEOs and the top executives in a way that when they need you, they'll come to you.
Yes. That's such a good point. And it goes a long, long way. This kind of, I'm almost thinking about a service mindset, kind of a servant leader, like, and the service industry. In the service industry, you're just there. You work in service to this person, your client, your customer, whether it's a restaurant or you're a CHRO in a $30 billion market cap organization. It's like, remembering that you're there to support, to help, regardless of the role, really. But that goes a really long way in building trust. The tricky part, and just to build on what you're saying is, to have the subject matter expertise and the depth, the true expertise that you're talking about, and the curiosity to always be learning, to always be listening, to always be asking questions. Sometimes what builds sometimes what builds trust quickly when you come across someone that is curious about what you're doing and has the right questions and has that beginner's mindset, and to carry the balance. And talking with you both, it seems like this is exactly the way you have found to show up. This idea that yes, you know your stuff inside and out, and you spend every day a little curious about what you don't know.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
Nancy, what do you think about that? Absolutely. I think the core of it is fostering those relationships, enabling trust. Our job is to help others and enable others. So it is really key for us to be a partner. So it's not pushing our HR solutions, but really taking that business perspective and understanding the business and taking that outside in perspective. So I think the more we can be aligned and at the table and having those conversations is going to continue to differentiate our function. And I think another opportunity, it's hard day to day. Sometimes we are in the weeds. We have this analogy we use here at Rogers where we say, are you on the dance floor or are you on the balcony? And I think it's important for us in HR to think of ourselves not every day on the dance floor, but take that balcony view, observe the dance, support the business as a trusted advisor to have a longer outlook as well, and know when to balance those the shift between the two. But again, it's all about relationships and not pushing your own agenda, but being there for others.
So right. Well, okay. I can't thank both of you enough for making the time this afternoon in Toronto and this morning here in California to talk a little bit about your presentations, both in Toronto and then in Scottsdale, respectively. Really looking forward to meeting you in person, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about what you guys are seeing inside the company and what you guys are seeing inside yourselves, and hearing more about your personal journey of transformation and the organization's journey of transformation, and how discipline and accountability and rigor has become a pillar in all of that. So with that, I will give you back your day, and again, very much look forward to meeting you in person in a few short weeks.
Hal, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to meeting you.
Absolutely. You as well.